there was an attempt by either the local Unitarian Universalist congregation that he was involved with, or the Unitarian Universalist Association, or a combination of both, to persuade the victims to sign confidentiality agreements. This is a very common practice in the Unitarian Universalist Association, or at least it was. You know, when somebody complained about clergy sexual misconduct, they were often cajoled or coerced into signing confidentiality agreements. And it's clear that there was an attempt made to persuade the victims of Reverend Mac Wallace Mitchell to sign confidentiality agreements, which basically would have silenced them. And you know, that would mean that, you know, he would not face criminal charges for his rapes. Well, what happened is that some church members who had been told by the victims of what was happening took it upon themselves to inform the police about this. So in other words, whether they knew about this attempt to get the girls to sign a confidentiality agreement or not, I suspect they didn't know about it. These 4 or 5 or so female members of Reverend Mac Wallace Mitchell's church thought the best thing to do was to report the alleged rapes to the police. And I agree 100% with that. But what happened is in reporting the alleged rapes to the police, these women essentially sabotaged the efforts to keep it all under wraps by having the girls sign confidentiality agreements. And I have very reasonable grounds to believe that Kathleen K. Montgomery would have been involved in this attempted cover-up in the early 1990s if she was the executive vice president of the UUA at the time, and I'm quite sure that she was. As I said, this is just off the top of my head. You know, I do actually know the dates. I just can't specifically remember them. I'm just being cautious here. I'm like 99% sure that Kathleen K. Montgomery was the executive vice president of the UUA at the time, and that she almost certainly would have been involved in any effort to have the girls sign confidentiality agreements. You know, this would have been legal documents drafted by lawyers for the church, either the local church or the Unitarian Universalist Association, or both. So it's very, very likely that Kathleen K. Montgomery was involved in this attempted cover-up of rape of teenage Tibetan refugees by Reverend Mac Wallace Mitchell. And I find it incredibly interesting how, you know, more than a quarter century later, Kathleen K. Montgomery definitely was coordinating the work of Stikeman Elliott lawyer, Maitre Marc-Andre Coulombe, to falsely accuse me of blasphemous libel in an effort to intimidate me into removing blog posts that tell the truth about the Reverend Mac Wallace Mitchell case. You know, so it's like almost like a double cover-up. You know, first in the early 1990s, Kathleen K. Montgomery is almost certainly involved in Unitarian Universalist legal shenanigans, which sought to silence the victims of Reverend Mac Wallace Mitchell's rapes. And that all fell apart when, as I said, a few members of Reverend Mac Mitchell's church reported the alleged rapes to the police, and so he was arrested, and he was charged, and he was found guilty, and he went to jail for some years. It's not clear what happened to him after that. But the point being is that the attempts to cover up Reverend Mac Wallace Mitchell's rape of teenage Tibetan refugees in the early 1990s failed as a result of a few members of his church, doing the right thing and reporting to the police what they'd been told. So, this was publicized in newspapers and so on. It became known at least regionally, if not nationally. I became aware of the Reverend Mac Mitchell case from direct discussions with advocates for Unitarian Universalist clergy sexual misconduct victims, but also from various online forums and discussions and so on. And, also from directly accessing the newspaper reports about Reverend Mac Mitchell's rapes. Very few of the newspaper articles are available on the publicly available internet. There's just a few vestiges left, and I think this is partly why the UUA tried to have my blog post removed because there's really not a lot about it. If they'd been successful in getting my blog posts removed, they would have diminished the visibility of the Reverend Mac Mitchell case on the internet. But getting back to the newspaper articles, they are available in newspaper databases